So we've recently done some videos on stocking for both 10-gallon and 20-gallon tanks. I will put those videos in the description below, but in those videos we talk about shell dwellers and how they are a really good fit for smaller tanks. In this video we're going to be talking about Neolamprologus similis, one of my favorite shell dwellers, so stay tuned. Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics. We've done a lot of videos on shell dwellers in the past. We've also talked about a lot of Lake Tanganyika fish. I will put those videos in the description below. I think you will find them useful, especially if you're interested in Neolamprologus similis. So this is our Neolamprologus similis tank. It's a 20-gallon long, and you can see here we have 7 of them in the tank currently. Now, this is a fish that comes from Lake Tanganyika in Africa. The water there has a high pH, it is relatively hard, and the temperature is relatively warm. So when it comes to differentiating males and females, the males are going to be a little bit larger. You can see a male here, a female right in front of them. The males will get pretty close to 2 inches, while the females will probably stay right around 1.5 inches or so, and the males just look a little bit thicker bodied. When it comes to the coloration, there isn't a huge difference. The males will sometimes show a little bit more color. Their colors will be a little bit darker. The differences between the light bars and the dark parts of the body, that's going to be a little bit more pronounced. But other than that, they pretty much look the same, which is kind of cool if you're just wanting a really cool looking fish. Maybe you're not into breeding and you just want to find something where if you get females, they're not going to look all brown and drab. Now, when it comes to their temperament, this is a relatively aggressive little fish. You'll see here in the not too distant future, they have like little fangs. They will attack you if there are babies in the shell. But they generally are okay with one another in terms of putting them in a tank, as a decent sized community. They're not going to be super rough on one another, although the males will protect a small area in the tank and try to fend off other males from going into that area. But for the most part, a lot of their disagreements can be handled with a little bit of display. They'll flare out their fins a little bit, as you're going to see in this video, but nothing too crazy. When you're thinking about tank mates for these guys, it really does depend on the size of the tank. Now, as I mentioned, we have done videos about stocking 10-gallon and 20-gallon tanks. I'll put those in the description below, as well as in the upper right-hand corner throughout this video. But tank mates, again, size of the tank is really going to be a major player there. If it's a 10-gallon, you're probably best off just having a small group of about 4 or 5. If they breed, great. If they don't, that's okay too. And you might have to remove some of the fry periodically. If you've got a 20 long, again, I would probably mostly stick with just what you see here. What gets interesting is when you start moving up maybe into the 29s or the 40 breeders or the 55s, that provides a lot more options. And so you can be looking at other types of Lake Tanganyika fish. So for instance, we keep some of our shell dwellers. We have Neolamprologus brevis in a 40-gallon breeder with Cyprichromis leptosoma. I've done a species profile on those fish. Definitely recommend check that out. I'll put that in the upper right hand corner. Those are really great tank mates when you have a little bit of height to your tank, especially like a 55 or a 75. Those would go really well together. You could look at some of the rock dwelling Lake Tanganyika fish too, things like Julidochromis transcriptus, possibly some Altolamprologus calvus, Paracyprichromis, Neolamprologus lelupi, the Brichardi. Those are all really great fish if you've got a little bit of a larger tank with a decent amount of rock work, where all the fish I just mentioned, they're going to hang out more by the rocks. And then these fish here, the shell dwellers, of course, they're going to hang out a lot closer to the shells. Now with calvus and some of these other fish, you might, if you're interested in breeding these fish, that might not be the best idea because you might start to see some of the fry getting picked off. However, if you're just really wanting to set up a Lake Tanganyika style tank, those are all really good options. We have had some success with keeping bristlenose plecos with some of our shell dwellers. In fact, there is a relatively large bristlenose pleco in this tank taking care of the algae, and we've had them in with Maltese and brevis, and they're doing okay there as well. So how do you deal with water parameters? For us, the temperature in our fish room, we heat the entire fish room, is somewhere between 78 and 80 degrees depending on the time of the year. And these guys have been doing great right around that temperature. Our pH is naturally high, so it really fits what these fish want. Our pH is generally around an 8.2, and they'd be great between an 8.0 and an 8.5. We also have some relatively hard water at 10 degrees hardness, or right around 180 parts per million. They definitely would prefer hard water, so if you've got a low pH, softer water, you're going to have to do something to adjust that water, those water qualities. But if you're right around maybe low to mid 7s, that's probably about the lower limit that these fish would appreciate. Water quality's got to be good with your shell dwellers. So we have to make sure that we have a well-cycled tank, no ammonia, no nitrites, keep the nitrates low. We're trying to keep it right around 20 parts per million or less. Now, when it comes to feeding these shell dwellers, Neolamprologus similis, they're really relatively easy to feed. We do a lot of flake food, just standard flake food, micro pellets. What they really enjoy, and I think one of the things that helps them breed quite a bit, is giving them live baby brine. Even the adults love to eat live baby brine. I found that to be true with all of our shell dwellers. Adults, the fry, live baby brine is a great food source for them. They also like frozen brine shrimp, the occasional frozen bloodworms. They're really not that hard to feed. Tank size, I've kind of mentioned it already. 10 gallon would probably be the minimum for a small group. This is a 20 gallon long, like I said. If you really want a large community, the more surface area you have at the bottom of the tank, the more community dynamics you're going to see. We've done species profiles in Neolamprologus multifasciatus before. We have them in a 50 gallon lowboy. That is a really cool setup. I will put that in the upper right hand corner, definitely in the description below if you want to check that out as well. But so yeah, surface area is going to give you a lot more options. Now, when you decorate your tank, you can see here, we've done a couple things. The rock that you see there is it's more just for aesthetics, but the shells are super important. So you definitely want to have more shells than you have fish. And I think I generally try to start out with having at least twice as many shells in my tank as I have fish. And over time, after they start having more babies, you're probably going to want to add more shells to the tank as well. The shells that you see here are just escargot shells. I get them on Amazon. I will put an Amazon affiliate link down in the description below, but they're super cheap. They work out super good. We've had them in all of our shell dweller tanks, and the fish absolutely love them. Now, when it comes to plants, this is probably not a fish where you're going to have a ton of success with plants. We do have some shell dweller tanks that have some jungle vel that just kind of grows all over the place. They're not going to eat the plants. They really ignore them. The problem is when they start to adjust their tank, they're going to dig a little bit. They're going to have mountains of sand. They're going to bury their shells. And so that could uproot some plants. But that's also one of the really cool things about shell dwellers is when you're thinking about your decor, they like to rearrange their tanks. And so maybe they move some sand around. They create little hills everywhere. And they like to, like I said, they like to bury the shells. So just keep that in mind. If you're someone who really likes a pristine looking tank that is set up exactly the way you want it, these fish are going to make it their own. Breeding them is relatively easy. Again, as long as you've got the shells there and you've got males and females. As I said, the males are going to be a little bit larger than the females. I generally try to start out with a decent sized group of at least a half a dozen. You're almost guaranteed at that point to get at least one male and one female, at least usually, and let them do their thing. And usually within about 3 to 4 weeks, you'll start to see little tiny babies appearing from the shells. One of the things that's kind of interesting about the similis, they don't necessarily have the same fry care that some of the other shell dwellers do, especially like Neolamprologus multifasciatus, but they also don't generally prey on their fry either, so you will get a colony going at some point, provided that your water parameters are set, you're feeding them good food, and you've got males and females. Caring for the fry is not terribly difficult with all of our shell dwellers. Again, live baby brine shrimp is a huge part of our success when it comes to breeding shell dwellers. When I think, because we feed it to the adults, and especially when I think there might be a chance for babies hanging out in those shells, I'll add a little bit of live baby brine, and that really keeps our numbers up. I think one of the interesting things when it comes to Neolamprologus similis, and it's a little bit different from other shell dwellers, this is one shell dweller that I personally like better on a black substrate. As you can see here, I think it does a really good job of bringing out the contrast between those lighter stripes and the darker body. Most shell dwellers, at least in my personal opinion, look a little bit nicer on a light substrate, but this is one where if you're looking to change things up a little bit, this would be a good candidate for black background, black substrate. You're going to see the colors that you see here. If you put them on a lighter substrate, sometimes that contrast isn't as great. Where other shell dwellers, they really kind of muddy up and just look kind of brown or dark silver. These ones, as you can see here, they look really nice. Another thing to consider is when you're thinking about filtration, we have sponge filters in the vast majority of our fish tanks in our fish room. If you're going to use a hang on the back filter or a canister filter, make sure you put an intake sponge on either the canister or the hang on back filter. That will cut down on the potential for small fry to get sucked in through the intake. This is a fish I highly recommend if you get a chance to check them out. They're not as common as some of the other shell dwellers, but if you find them, definitely give them a try. You're going to like their personality. They're going to breed for you. They've got an interesting community dynamic, and they are a fun fish to watch. So if you enjoyed this video, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.